Hello and welcome to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. I'm your host, Leon Wolf. Today is Thursday, May the 14th, and we are glad that you have joined us. We have a slight panel change tonight. Scott Lincicome is out on vacation, not able to be with us, so our panel is a little different, but filling in for him is our third-time guest, Amy Otto of the Federalist, and we're glad to have Amy here filling in for Scott. The rest of our panelists here, F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon, Jeff Blehar of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk, and Neal Doing of the Federalist are all here. Appreciate you guys joining us as always. And our guest host for this week is Kurt Schlichter, and we are glad to have him of Town Hall, Breitbart, and numerous other internet publications. So let's get right into the news. Big day today in terms of the George Stephanopoulos story. Blew up, thank courtesy of the Washington Free Beacon. We're going to get Bill's input on that here in just a little bit. But our first question, as always, goes to the guest, and so, Kurt, this one is going to go to you. Of course, the issue with the Stephanopoulos thing is that he donated on 3 separate occasions that we know of now, $25,000 to the Clinton Foundation, and then during the course of doing essentially a media story on the Clinton Foundation, failed to disclose that he, in fact, was a donor to that foundation. So the question I have for you, Kurt, is this. Is the donation itself a problem, or is it just the failure to disclose that really makes this a story?
The whole thing is absolutely absurd. And it just goes to illustrate exactly what the mainstream media is today. First of all, they hire this political hack who spent years of his life cleaning up after the Clintons' messes. They hire and pretend he's an objective journalist. Of course, there are no objective journalists in the mainstream media. It's a steno pool for leftist politicians, which we all know. I think what really stuns me is that the liberals in the media are just so tired of lying, they're not even trying to do it well. They're not even putting out the effort anymore. Yeah, I gave $75,000 to the very people that the guy who was interviewing was talking about, but whatever. Chill. Yeah, it's absurd. I don't even know how to deal with it anymore. The fact that none of us are sitting here in slack-jawed amazement that this could happen is really what's telling about this. No one's surprised. No one's shocked. Hell, we're shocked it wasn't $100,000.
So, Amy, what about that? I mean, the reality of it is that politics is more or less a revolving door to the media, especially on the Democrat side, just because that's what media tends to be. But a job in politics. I mean, Ari Fleischer's got a gig with CNN right now. There are a lot of folks who come through Republican circles, and they're in the media as well. I mean, to what extent is the disclosure of personal relationships necessary in this kind of media environment in which there's a lot of people who come through politics and then end up reporting on politics?
Well, in a perfect world, it would be incredibly nice if disclosure was the standard, especially because what you just said, probably 99% of the public doesn't really pay attention to or is aware of, because Ari Fleischer goes on the TV, they don't know who Ari Fleischer is. They don't know his connection to previous roles. They don't know his frame of reference or anything like that. So certainly, yes, that's true. I think in the case of George Stephanopoulos, though, it's pretty blatant. I mean, he worked for the Clintons for years. He's still working for the Clintons, as far as I can tell. And that's the appearance here is so grotesque that it's pushing the limits. When you bring on somebody who's been a former White House person, and they usually put that in the little, the runner there, the call-up, that alerts the audience. But with George Stephanopoulos, he's being treated as a neutral observer interviewing people, yet he completely does not act in a neutral manner, and that's more of a concern to me. And I think in this case, it's good that the Free Beacon identified this and made a big deal about it, because it's important when he's reporting on the Clinton Foundation to note that he gave not $50,000, but I think it's $75,000 to that said foundation, and then grilled someone brutally about the how good that foundation was, instead of actually having some intellectual curiosity about whether there could be something that's possible, some wrongdoing.
So Jeff, what's the right balance here, right? So Stephanopoulos has taken himself out of consideration to moderate the GOP debate on ABC. Yeah, exactly. So, but what's the right balance, right? I mean, do we want to say, look, if you have some connection to a person who's actually running for office, you shouldn't be commenting on the news. I mean, isn't it true, though, that a lot of these people who have the best connections, who are able to do the best reporting, are the people who have personal knowledge of the players involved, who have had some kind of background? I mean, where do we want to draw the line? Do we want to say, look, if you're a past career in politics, past connections with Clinton or Jeb Bush, you're out of talking about this, or what's the right approach?
Listen, Washington. Everybody knows how incestuous Washington, D.C. is, and then there's no better example of it than the fact that Andrea Mitchell, who was reporting on finances and financial news for years and years, was married and is married to Alan Greenspan, who was the chairman of the Fed at the time. So these are the sorts of things that people let slide. It was Byron York today who I thought was he posted a link back to one of his old pieces that he wrote when he was writing for the Wall Street Journal editorial page in the 90s, pointing out that when they first hired Stephanopoulos, ABC was very cagey about what kind of a role he would have. They said, no, he's just going to be reporting on like human interest stuff. This is not going to be a political gig for him. And then, of course, within 3 years, he was the chief White House or Washington, D.C. correspondent for the network. And it's important to remember that in the eyes of a lot of people in the media, Stephanopoulos had done a lot to sort of soften his reputation as an ex-Democratic hack. And it's worth pointing out that only Democrats are allowed to have their past sins or their past partisan sins be forgotten or absolved and return to the world of objective journalism. This doesn't happen for Republicans. We know this. But that said, it was obvious to me long before this revelation, it was the 2012 situation. If everyone recalls that the whole war on women messaging, the birth control, remember I remember watching it as it happened. He sprung this random question on the debates, the GOP primary debates, to all the candidates saying, would you ban birth control? And Mitt Romney, I remember, took the question and looked and was literally like, what the hell are you even talking about? Of course not. I'm not going to. Who would want to do that? But it was obviously that he had been fed these, the Democratic strategy points early on, and they told him, we want you to introduce this meme into the body politic now so we can start to weaponize it. So he's been a hack for a long time. This only proves it. The simple rule is this. You get an assumption that you can try to be an objective person. As long as you don't transgress that with something like this, you can be allowed to. And the reason I say that is you can look at someone like Jake Tapper. I remember in 2001 when I was a kid, Jake Tapper was writing for Salon.com. He was writing extremely partisan liberal stuff for Salon.com. I mean, he was a lot younger then, too, to be fair. It's 15 years ago. But look at the man now versus the man he was then. Nobody would say he isn't a fair journalist now. He was given a chance to move away from his partisan roots. Anybody can. But if you come out and you besoil yourself like this, you can't. You've got to be taking off political coverage if your network wants to have any sense of integrity. That's my opinion.
So, Bill, let me toss this over to you. Obviously, you work for the Free Beacon. They're right in the middle of this story. The thing that kind of infuriates me about the way Stephanopoulos has handled this is, look, you guys dug up the information and made this a story. How is it acceptable, and how is he allowed to get off with basically coming clean and giving subsequent interview to other publications who will not be named, without coming back and giving some sort of comment to the actual news organization that ran the story? I mean, that's not how it works in any other media. The entity that breaks the story gets the comment, when the person comes out. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, Andrew Stiles over at the Free Beacon discovered the donation recently and reached out to ABC News last night and asked them to provide comment. ABC News said that they would give it to him this morning, and they did actually send over their statement and Stephanopoulos' statement about 10 minutes after the other outlet that shall not be named published this story and got to claim the scoop, and the reporter had the gall to actually say, oh, big breaking scoop coming from me next. So that was very fun, and it actually turns out that this is part of ABC News' playbook. In 2012, Josh Peterson, who was then with the Daily Caller, is now with the Franklin Center and a Free Beacon contributor. He had a scoop about President Obama secretly attending the wedding of an ABC News news producer, and he reached out to ABC News for comment, and lo and behold, a certain Roslyn-based political outlet had the story the next day, and then Josh Peterson subsequently received his response after their story went live. So it seems to be there's a certain reporter that the media goes to, specifically ABC News, every time they want to spin somebody. And there are reporters out there who are perfectly willing to get spun. And you expect this. And Politico Magazine's Jack Schaefer actually wrote this today. You expect this from businesses. You expect this from politicians. These people to come out and basically leak information and get rid of scoops and massage the stories and then give them to other reporters as a stalling tactic so that their spin can get respected. You do not expect it from another media outlet. Disgusting thing about it.
I just want to jump in here. I'm sorry to interrupt, Leon. I just want to jump in here for 1 second to offer some serious praise to the Free Beacon. Everywhere on Twitter you find this, and I think one of their writers made this very same point. They find people saying, oh, wow, look at the Free Beacon. They broke some news. Who would have ever expected that? It's high time we stop acting surprised when they report big news. They have a lot of good reporters. Bill, obviously, is one. We got Lachlan Marquet. You got Alana Goodman. You got Andrew Stiles, who broke this one. They're leaving a lot of people's lunches, and it's no surprise to me that when they go to these people, they reach out, they run to certain other outlets to prevent the Beacon from claiming credit because they're doing a fantastic job lately.
So let me go to Neal next, and one of the fascinating things to me about all these particular stories is the question of what kind of shelf life the outrage du jour is going to have. And I remember specifically with respect to the Brian Williams thing that we all sat around here the kind of the day after that broke and said, oh my gosh, well this is interesting, but it's not going to go anywhere. Lo and behold, 3 weeks later, he was out as the head of NBC News. What kind of long-term impact do you think that this is going to have on Stephanopoulos? I mean, is this something that his credibility can survive? I mean, realistically, it is abhorrent to journalistic standards what he did, to comment on a story without disclosing that major of a conflict of interest. What do you think the long-term implications are going to be for Stephanopoulos and for ABC News?
Well, if Brian Williams hadn't happened, I would probably say not too much. He'll probably sit out the debates, and that would be that. But after Brian Williams, in a post Brian Williams world, I think there may be some greater consequences for him. He might be asked to take a seat for a while, or even shit canned. I mean, we can hope. I mean, I'm certainly feeling optimistic this evening, which is a rare occasion for me. So I do think that this is pretty obvious, even to people who aren't necessarily following politics too closely. They can take a look at this and say, well, he worked for the Clintons, and he gave the Clinton Foundation money, and that doesn't make much sense to me. So if they're smart, they'll sideline him. But anything could happen. I mean, I was wrong about Brian Williams, I think, and so yeah.
All right, let's go back to Kurt, and we're going to shift gears a little bit, and I want to stay kind of with the 2016 theme here. Let's talk a little bit about Iraq, and that's been the question that's been making the rounds for all the GOP candidates this week. After kind of Jeb Bush initially flubbed an answer on the question, and the question, of course, is, look, knowing what we know now, would you still have invaded Iraq? And, of course, Bush gave an answer, first of all, that I think indicated that he didn't hear the question clearly, and then kind of 2 or 3 days later went on Hannity and backtracked sort of. How would you rate Jeb's handling of this particular Iraq issue and the question that he was asked?
Look, Jeb is a failure in all things, and including dealing with questions. Look, I take depositions all the time, and I always say, if you don't understand the question I'm asking, don't answer it, because I'm going to hold you to the answer. So that's not an excuse. This guy was a governor for 8 years of a major state. He ought to know better, but it's just part and parcel of the utter failure that is Jeb Bush. He's incompetent on every level. He has no track record of significant achievements. He's there simply because of his last name and because a bunch of rich guys want a guy who's a lot like them, vacuous, boring, doesn't want to upset the boat. They want a guy like him in. Jeb Bush today, I believe it was today, or maybe it was the other day, flubbed a question from a 19-year-old Howard Zinn reading college student who started babbling on with, giving the full full breadth of her 19 years of experience on opining that George Bush created ISIS. Now, I was in a war in the Middle East several years before this genius was born, so I'm not really holding her to a high standard. But the fact that Jeb couldn't handle this question, that he couldn't field this softball, this lobbed softball, just tells us more about Jeb than enough about Jeb that we need to know.
And this, to me, wasn't even the worst answer that he's given. I mean, you remember he was asked right in the middle of the Iran negotiations, hey, do you think that we should support regime change in Iran? Look, I don't know what the right answer is, but Jeb's answer was, gosh, that sure is a good question. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. How does he not have a prepared answer for that right in the middle of a media firestorm?
I'd almost rather somebody say, I don't have a great answer for that question, if they don't. But I'd prefer they be prepared. I don't think that's too much to ask for someone who, wants to be...
But you can give a non-answer to the question without literally saying, I don't know. I mean, that's a skill a politician has to have.
Look, right? He's a terrible politician. He's the Republicans' Hillary Clinton. He's awful. I only wish he was smart enough to keep him as segregated from the media as they are to keep Hillary away. But no, actually, I take that back. I'm glad he's out there because he's terrible, and he's going to trip over his own foot, and he's going to fail. And I long to see him fail. I want to see Jeb Bush humiliated, broken, and a smoldering ruin, figuratively, of course.
Kurt, you meant to say the word dick there, didn't you? He's going to trip over his dick, isn't he?
Am I allowed to say dick on here?
Just had to say that.
Oh, gosh, I was worried. Yeah, he was going to trip over his own dick, which I don't expect is long enough. He doesn't strike me as the most, high tea kind of individual there is out there.
Oh, boy.
As for
this is why we have Amy on the panel, and she is failing in her job of civilizing the rest of us. But let's go. It's an impossible and thankless task. Let's go to Amy for the next question. To me, I think that this particular question is a dangerous question for all of the GOP contenders. The question of would you still invade Iraq knowing everything that we know today? Because it is an issue where the polling seems to pit the Republican base against independents, moderates, and other persuadable voters. Is it a more dangerous question for Bush in particular as compared to the other GOP contenders just because of what his last name is? Amy, you're muted.
Well, I'm sorry about that. So it could be. I mean, I don't think it actually has to be. Unfortunately, I think Jeb has made it a more dangerous question by not being prepared and more shocking to me not knowing that type of question was coming. But I mean, the premise of the question is rather silly, and it actually should be rather easy to deal with because it's absurd. Like, let's question when we should have entered in World War II. Let's question this. Of course, in hindsight, you can always make better decisions, and it should be something easy. If any of them want to be an executive, they should be able to answer a dumb question like this and say, look, the premise is nonsensical, and this is absurd. But the more interesting question is, what is our choices when we went into Iraq mean for you when you make choices in foreign policy, and how do you take that into account, what happened there, and walk through that? I mean, that's what the media should be asking, but the media doesn't care. This is as dumb as the evolution question, in my opinion, because it's a useless question. It's really meant to be a gotcha question, and it's meant to remind everybody in the audience the GOP wants you to go to war all the time, and that's really the intent of the question. It's not actually an intellectually interesting question the way it's being framed. And so, yes, of course, it's meant to be more dangerous for Jeb Bush because of that, and he certainly helped them out quite a bit by being shocked it was even being asked.
So, Bill, let's go to you. Cruz and Rubio have both handled kind of the same question in slightly different ways, although both said that essentially knowing what we know now, they wouldn't have gone into Iraq. Of course, Cruz essentially said, no, I wouldn't have done that, and I also wouldn't have done what Obama did in Libya, so kind of putting the ball back in the Democrat court. Rubio, on the other hand, said, No, and I don't think that George W. Bush would have either. Rate their respective answers and how they handled the question as compared to one another.
Well, I thought Rubio had by far the most excellent point. It was a fantastic answer in which he basically demonstrated, and number one, that the entire speech he gave about foreign policy was absolutely incredible. But in terms of the way he framed and flipped that question, he basically made it a priority not to break Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment in regards to how you treat your fellow Republicans. He wasn't going to throw him under the bus. And when you hear about the, I guess, political infighting that's going on among Florida politicos in the wake of, the Jeb versus Rubio type infighting, I think that Rubio showed a lot of class and was also, reframed it in a very good way. Cruz, I think I liked Cruz's response. I liked the fact that he kind of gained some ground on not only as a tough on foreign policy kind of guy, but also kind of borrowed a page from the playbook of Rand Paul by bringing this into Libya. I think the risk that Cruz runs by taking this line is the second you start saying you make the debate not as much about the substance as the process, then you make it very easy for the media to do the whole, oh, how would you have voted, and they get to pounce on you and force you to answer that question, and they catch you, if you're not prepared, they can catch you flat-footed the way they did Jeb Bush, who I'm with you guys. I have no idea how he was caught so flat-footed. I have no idea how he hasn't spent a decade answering this question in front of the mirror every day if he intended to run for president. But so I guess if I was rating them on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being joy and 5 being me, I would give Rubio a 5 and Cruz a 3.5.
So let's go to joy. There's Gallup polling that seems to indicate that by a 57 to 39 margin, including 73 to 18 margin among independents, people in America say that the Iraq invasion was a mistake, knowing what we know now. By 61 to 34% margin, American voters approve of the 2011 withdrawal of troops from Iraq. Can a GOP candidate win in 2016 while still defending the decision to go into Iraq, at least on its terms? And kind of the flip side of the question, can a candidate win the GOP primary by strongly disavowing it?
No. Yes. Next person. Okay, seriously though, just to elaborate a little bit more on that. I'm not used to being that brief. Yeah, no. The answer is no. No candidate can win a general election defending on its own terms the invasion, and I don't really think that there's a problem with that. I know there's some disagreement about this in the comments while we're talking here, but I don't think it's a tough question. I think if you know now, yeah, exactly. Aaron, our producer. But if you know then what you know now, you can't justify going in. You can still say that the world is a better place for Saddam Hussein, being, having stood on a gibbet, but it doesn't. You're not going to sell going into Iraq and losing, how many thousands of our best young men and women for the war. It's not going to fly. Can a candidate in the primary win whilst disavowing the decision to go in Iraq? Yeah, well, I sure would imagine so, because guess what? Almost all of the leading candidates have done just that. So we already know the answer here, unless you're going to tell me that, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, even Jeb Bush himself, who finally came to that conclusion. Are you going to tell me that none of them are going to win? I guess that means it falls to Scott Walker, who's been lucky enough to shut up during this whole kerfuffle. Maybe he's going to come out fully in favor of the invasion. He's the one guy who hasn't spoken out of it in the top tier. Unless you're saying that he's guaranteed to win, somebody can win the primary while disavowing the decision to invade Iraq, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right, Neal. So let's go to you. We've had kind of an interesting round of treating Jeb like the pinata here over his answer on Iraq. I touched briefly on the Iran issue. I mean, look, is it time for us to start applying the label "not ready for prime time" for Jeb Bush? I mean, is he that far down the rabbit hole of media ineptitude that we need to say, look, forget the guy's policy positions. He just can't be trusted not to flub it with the media? And Isn't that kind of the reason that he's expected to be the establishment front runner? Is that he was supposed to be that guy?
Leon, you remember his brother, George W. Bush, noted orator, distinguished speaker.
George W. Bush would never get elected. Forget everything that happened between 2000 and 2008. That guy would never get elected again if he ran for the first time. You have
show me a better speaker with a bullhorn standing on the smoldering ruins of 9/11.
Yeah, yes, Bill, that is a moment in American history that gives me chills to this day.
Same here.
That is an occasion. Excuse me.
But only because fire doesn't make steel.
Rising to leadership. But you'll also recall that during the 2000 election, the word strategery entered the public lexicon because Will Ferrell's skit on SNL. George W. Bush was portrayed as an inept buffoon who could barely speak English, and he won election. Jeb Bush has time to improve. To be fair, he did, but Jeb Bush might be running against Hillary Clinton. Who knows? So I think Jeb has room to improve. I don't want to make a full-throated defense of Jeb Bush here. I don't think that's warranted. I would prefer that he not run at all. I think having the third Bush run would be unseemly for a republic. So I hope he quits, but not for the reason of media ineptitude.
Just general ineptitude?
Yes. Well, no, the nepotism, that whole angle, that hereditary nobility thing that we're supposed to oppose.
He's just as dorky as Prince Charles.
Yes.
Look, I mean, everything about Jeb Bush is wrong. Starting with his last name, his damn first name, everything he stands for, everything he does, everything he says. The fact they put a medal around Hillary Clinton's neck. Holy shit! Who is the guy whose name isn't Bush who thinks Jeb Bush is the man? Where is the groundswell of support out there in that crazy place we call America of people going, Jeb, Jeb, Jeb? You know what we need? Another fucking Bush.
Even his mom didn't want him to run it first. She changed her mind.
Okay, you know what the thing is that there's a famous Supreme Court case, and Kurt will get this, where Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said that 3 generations of imbeciles were enough. Well, 3 generations of Bushes are enough. We're done. We don't need any more.
But he's picking the perfect election to run in if he's going to go against a Clinton, right? I mean, and that's the worst part of this.
It is. It's horrifying. It's horrifying, the prospects of what we had to face over the next year and a half. So let's shift gears a little bit, and not to pun here, but we're going to talk a little bit about Amtrak. We're going to go back to Kurt. Of course, horrible tragedy with the train that came off the rails, and I believe we've had confirmed 5 people dead at this point. The NTSB is saying now that it looks like the train was traveling at approximately 106 miles an hour approaching the curve, and when the data recorder stopped recording, the speed was around 102 miles an hour. I guess my question is, I'm surprised, having ridden on Amtrak, that the decision about how fast a car is going is actually made by a guy in the car with the hand on the throttle. I mean, isn't it somewhat surprising to you that that's still down to an actual engineer there and not centrally controlled by some automated system?
Look, I'm big on decentralization, but let's look at it as what it was. Another unionized government employee killed a bunch of citizens through gross incompetence. That's what happened. It wasn't infrastructure. It wasn't, the budget cuts. It was a loser Democrat, because that's what it was, unionized government flunky whose total failure to perform at even a baseline level of competence led to the death of 7 people. Now, of course, we're not hearing about that because the same media that thinks that they can go and hire a guy like George Stephanopoulos to be an objective reporter won't phrase it as what it was. Now, look, I don't have a problem with human beings controlling trains. I'm a big believer in decentralization, but let's understand what this is. This is the government failing again to perform a basic task. And that's how it should be seen. Amtrak should be completely defunded. sold off to the highest bidder. And I've got a personal feeling in this, although I live here in L.A. I took my family on that same damn train last summer. That could have been us. We could have been killed by this loser. This annoys me. This disturbs me. And we need to stop it. We need to get some accountability. And the only way you can do that, you can't ever do that with a government employee. You can't, again, let me say it again, you can't ever do that with a government employee. You need to get private enterprise in there, where if they realize it's going off the tracks, they know they're going to get hit with lawsuits, they might actually hire somebody who's not a dribbling, drooling buffoon.
Well, I'm not 100% sure that we know for sure right now that the guy, there's some indication that he put on the brake at some point. We still don't know. I'm willing to, at this point, still wait for the fact.
Before it got to 102 miles per hour at a turn where in the 1940s, 79 people had been killed when a speeding train went off the track. I mean, look, this isn't rocket science, okay? I don't even have to know how to drive a train to know that I'm not going to take a train around a corner.
No, nobody's disputing that it was going too fast around the curve. The question is, it's proper for the train to go at that speed on a straight track. We don't know yet for certain why it was that it was still going at that speed when it goes around the curve.
Well, there was a guy in there, a unionized Democrat employee, who was supposed to make sure it didn't.
But there's also the possibility of instrumental error. We don't know yet. I agree that is the most likely answer, that somebody fucked up, but there could something else have happened involving mechanical failures. You just don't want to rule it out quite yet.
I so wish I had a Pennsylvania law license so I could argue the case, and I would get up there and say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's what they want you to believe, that an expert in driving trains couldn't tell the difference between 50 miles an hour and 100 miles an hour. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you think that's a coherent, powerful narrative, then don't give my clients hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, Irina, my beautiful wife, would like a Tesla. I would like a Tesla too. I would love to make that argument and get us both Teslas for every day of the week.
All right, Amy, so let's move on to you. Amtrak says there's a system that's known as positive train control that supposedly is going to automatically prevent a train from going too fast around curves like this. They say that this exists. They say the reason it wasn't in place in this location is not that they couldn't afford it. In fact, they already had the money ready and earmarked to spend. It's that they were having problems with radio signals interfering with the system along this particular stretch of the track. In fact, it exists in other parts of the track, and they anticipated having those worked out and installed within the next year. Given that, what even possibly is the argument for throwing more money at this problem to solve it? I mean, I've heard people making it, and I don't see it. I mean, how is it even fitting with the narrative of the facts that we know now, even at this early stage, a day after the accident?
Well, see, what's funny is if Amtrak was a private business and they were out of code of a regulation for having this operational, they would have been shut down for good until they fix this within their own budget constraints and cut spending someplace else to buy exactly what you're talking about. The problem is because they have an endless slush fund, so they don't actually have a budget because they're just backfilled with money from Congress. They don't actually understand how to make strategic choices in spending. If what you just described is so important for Amtrak to be operational, they should determine in the money they have to prorate and prioritize that. They already have quite a bit of money from the taxpayers, and if they can't use that money to provide that service effectively, if they were a private company, the government would shut them down. So I think the government should start treating Amtrak like it would any other private business that had just killed 8 people by not being up to code, because the EPA is allowed to shut down all sorts of coal operations and all sorts of things, yet they don't shut down the businesses they run, and that seems to be a double standard to me. And I would go with that angle. It's not about money. It's about lack of oversight. If they had safety things that they were supposed to have done, they should have done them already. How much money do they get a year? And that corridor should make money by now. And if it cannot, the question should be asked, this cannot be run well by the government. That's what we're seeing. I don't think it's an answer of more money because they have plenty of money. What they have shown is a lack of ability to make choices about how to spend the money.
I agree. And, regardless of how you feel about decentralization generally, as Kurt said, it's surprising to me that on a closed track system it isn't required that there's an automated something that would stop, in case a train fails on the track, would stop another train from coming up behind it and so on and so forth. But that having been said, setting all that aside, Jeff, regardless of whether you think that any extra money would have done any good, and I don't think that it's the case that it is there nonetheless an optics issue with the GOP cutting funding literally the day after the crash, as they did in the House?
No, there really isn't, and here's why. I had a pretty entertaining back and forth with a guy who's become a friend of mine, Kyle Kondik. He writes for the Larry Sabato at the University of Virginia. He's a political, elections prognosticator. And when the news came out that this guy was speeding, or the engineer had the car going 100 miles an hour in a 50-mile-per-hour zone, he said something I just think is really funny. I mentioned it the other night too, which is that this is great because it at least will spare us a 24-hour debate about infrastructure funding that will be immediately forgotten by Sunday, which is the truth. Nobody is going to remember that this was an issue 1 week from now. There's going to be, information will come out, particularly if it comes out that it was human error. The optics of this are just going to be forgotten within a moment. In fact, honestly, I would argue that they've already been forgotten. Nobody's talking about it anymore. All we're doing now is mopping up on Twitter. We're making fun of the people who are talking about this in terms of infrastructure funding, but nobody's seriously advancing the argument anymore as it becomes more and more clear that it was due to human error. So, the optics favor us. And even if the optics hadn't favored us, again, we forget often all too much how short the public's memory is in these situations. Now, that may be a bad thing, but it's a thing, and in this case, it's going to redound to our benefit.
So, Bill, you wrote a story in the Washington Free Beacon about before really probably the literal smoke had cleared, the union organizers for Amtrak were already saying some what I consider to be highly offensive things. Tell us about the union dispute that's going on with the Amtrak and their claims with respect to management.
Well, one angle that I didn't get to put in the story, that there are two things that are very important here. Is Amtrak belongs to a subsidiary of the Teamsters. We all know that they're lovely people. And their union is called the Brotherhood of Maintenance of the Way Employees, which is the worst union title I've ever heard in my life, and I cover this for a living. BMWE, and this is how you knew, this is the other thing that has to be noted, BMWE is a very partisan organization. They're in the midst of a huge labor dispute with Amtrak regarding employee standards and safety standards. This is an ongoing dispute, and in fact, many local chapters have already authorized, been granted by their members authority to strike if they're unable to find some common ground with Amtrak here. These guys are bitter partisans. They're aware that one of their own was operating that train. The facts about the speed had not yet come out yet. And these people did not actually make the politically callous argument that infrastructure spending was to blame here. They blamed management. They said that it's all about your safety standards. When a union is sitting there going, guys, that argument is just scoring political points. We're going to avoid that and talk about actual safety standards and the facts that are relevant to this case. And you have when you have Chris Cuomo and media prognosticators going Amtrak budget cuts, Wikipediaing that and then blaming a crash on that. That shows you how empty this narrative was from the beginning. That this is all about infrastructure spending. Because if that was a viable argument, the union would have made it right away, but they didn't. They laid it at the feet of management, unbelievably. And the entire post, they said Amtrak, and there's this is what I don't like about the internet is there's always this temptation to run in and capitalize and court and score.
I think Bill is frozen on us. Is it just me? Is everybody else okay?
No, he froze.
Just it, but yeah, it's very.
Okay, well, we've lost Bill, so let me...
Well, he's saying something genius, and we'll never know, and that's sad.
His face is frozen in a very awesome pose right now, so let's hope it stays that way for the rest of this show. Let's go to Neal. Not to get maudlin on you, Neal, but I tell you, it troubles me. It really does, for us as a society, that literally you can have somebody die these days and go 24 hours without people chiming in and trying to make some sort of political point off of it. I mean, it's troubling to me, not only for for how distasteful it is, but I think that it's a sign that life itself is considered cheaper as a society than it used to be. I mean, is there any chance for us to come back from this, or is the society, is this just how it is? I mean, if you happen to die in any way that's publicized by the media, you're going to be argued about by Republicans and Democrats on the cable news. Neal?
I'm sorry, was that question for me? The technical difficulties threw me. Could you repeat that question much more succinctly and with smaller words?
Doesn't it really suck how everybody's death is made into a political thing, Neal?
Yeah, it totally sucks. Yes, it does.
Neal, you have no excuse, Neal. You had no technical difficulties. You were just out to lunch.
He was just IMing.
My computer froze, thank you. But let me return to the matter at hand. Leon, it is a detestable impulse among the online class to immediately latch on to a tragedy and attempt to assign meaning to it. What people are afraid to admit to themselves is that we live in a universe that is cold and cruel and unfeeling, and that the only true it's true, and the only true happiness that we will ever experience is to be found after we die, when we return to the embrace of the Lord. That is where we will find perfect happiness. In this world, there is no such thing. Bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to people who are just okay. They just happen, and people can't accept that, so they have to try to blame something. They have to try to make it mean something deeper. And for these liberals and for these lefties, since they've replaced God with government, their solution is not prayer and looking to take comfort and that sort of thing, but to look for some sort of technocratic solution. Well, if only we'd funded Amtrak a little more. If only we'd blah, 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 blah. It's kind of sad and pathetic, but it's not going away anytime soon, and we're going to continue to see people exhibit truly deplorable behavior online within moments of the news of a tragedy. I don't think the bodies were even out of the train before people started floating their asinine theories about Amtrak funding. So,
why don't we just embrace this? Why don't we just get in there and fight? Holy cow! So there are dead people in a train. Why the hell can't we go and score some cheap political points to our advantage? Let's rock and roll. In a bar fight, I don't go, oh my gosh, you wanna don't hit me here and don't hit below the belt. No. Get in there and fight. Get in there and do it. Fair, just, decorum. All these words, they mean nothing. Just win, baby. I'm doing my Al Davis.
Kurt, you're absolutely
the
right.
trial lawyer doesn't
Kurt.
like morality. We get it.
I'm in my safe box, my safe space,
But
Kurt.
Kurt's right though, because if we actually don't respond to these assholes who are politicizing a tragedy, they occupy the space and they set root in it, and then we can't get them out. Then their little narrative is the one. So we have to respond to it. I actually resent it very much that we have to lower ourselves to that. But it's the truth, because they'll get traction.
What I like the most about Kurt's point is he speaks like the trial attorney he is, and as another one, I can respect this attitude. It's not about being nice. It's not about being just. It's game theory. It's tit for tat. It's if they hit you, you hit back. And if you don't hit back, whether it's out of an excess of propriety or morality, then you lose. Because unfortunately, that's the way the game is played.
That's the Bush problem. You had George Bush being figuratively sodomized every day in the media, and he just puttered around the Rose Garden, full of dignity and grace, and losing. And there were real consequences. We got our damn consequence sitting in the White House right now.
Won 2 elections. Listen, I think it's a false assumption to say that every attack has to be answered or else. I think some attacks are so repulsive they fall flat on their face in the absence of a response. And I think that engaging them can make the situation worse.
They're humiliating.
Sometimes let your enemy hang themselves is true, but I do think in this case, if the argument persists, you have to go dig up facts. Like in this case, let's go through Amtrak's budget, just like we did with the NIH when they claimed they could have cured Ebola, and show what they spend money on and how much the system you just referred to costs, and how, and that infrastructure argument will end. Because they don't want to do the actual factual, let's walk through the budget and see what choices they should have made. If we're forced in that situation, we need to be ready to do that.
And I think that there's a difference between responding to something that someone else says and wading into the space yourself. Because to me, I think that one of the ways in which life is made valuable is by showing solemnity and respect for the dead. I mean, I think that that's one of the ways that we respect life. And to me, I think that there's something to be said, that there's a time that we can say, look, we let these guys rush in and make assholes of themselves. We don't have to immediately respond and come out swinging, or we don't have to do it preemptively before the other side does it, certainly. There's still a way, I think, to win in the American public opinion. I could be wrong about that. And to me, the thing about Bush, who did win re-election by a larger margin than he won election, to me, the thing that won Bush that election was when he made his speech at the convention, and he choked up in tears talking about how he couldn't believe it when he went and talked to the families of the people who were killed in Iraq and heard that they were praying for him. That to me was the moment that he got in there with America, and people said, look, this is a good and decent person. Whatever we think about his policies or his silly answers that he gives or the words that he makes up sometimes, this is a good guy, and he'll steer us in the right direction. Again, I could be wrong.
That's why I didn't vote for him. You're going to vote for a crier? That guy's going to guide you through the war on terror?
He didn't cry. He choked up. There's a difference, Bill.
Hey, George Bush is a nice guy. There's a place for a nice guy. But it's not beside me when I'm pounding it out in a freaking bar against some guy who's mouthing off about my mama.
How many times have you been in bar fights over your mom and WMDs in Iraq?
Well, my mom...
Does it come up often?
Mostly involving sarin.
Your mom was a weapon of mass.
I didn't think Condoleezza Rice had any children.
Oh, no. I was about to say Kurt's mom is a weapon of mass destruction because she produced Kurt. So.
Well, that is true. My mom was a judge. I actually went into the Army to get a break.
All right, so let's move on to just a little bit of kind of smattering of Capitol Hill news. After shutting down the agreement to allow the Trans-Pacific Partnership to go forward, it appears that Republicans and Democrats are going to kind of go forward and give Obama the authorization to move forward on this deal. Kurt, are you still with us? Kurt has left the room, so we're going to go to Jeff. Jeff, what do you think? Is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is that a good deal for America? Is this something Republicans should be getting on board with?
Sure it is something. And I'm actually speaking as somebody who, believe it or not, sometimes deviates. If Scott Lincicome were here, he would probably whip the hide out of me for saying that I sometimes deviate from the pure free trade orthodoxy of conservative libertarian doctrine. But this is a good deal. And I know it's very strange to find ourselves aligning on the side of Barack Obama here. But not only is it a good deal, and it's something we should be promoting, but the idea of being reluctant to give him fast-track authority in Congress is insane. What a lot of people don't understand about the legislative process is the reason you have to give the president fast-track authority for any sort of trade deal is you can't have a situation where you run that bill through Congress and something that was negotiated with all the other foreign nations at the table gets 534 congressmen and senators tacking riders onto the bill to alter the deal. So you need to be able to have it go the way it was negotiated, from start to finish. That's something that every president should be given if the deal is in our favor, and in this case it is. I do support it.
Isn't that the same thing Obama said about the Iran deal?
Oh, give it a break. That's a shit question to ask me, Leon. You know the difference too.
But it's a fair one.
No, it's not a fair one. There's a difference between foreign trade and foreign policy, especially when it comes to arms control, for God's sake.
Hey, I got this idea. How about the Congress pass legislation and treaties, after debating them fully and completely? This fast-track crap is simply an end run around our Constitution. And I don't trust Obama as far as I can throw him. So why am I going to give him a chance to pass a bill that's going to have all this intellectual property crap in it, that it's going to suck up to his Hollywood pals, that's probably going to have immigration stuff in there that it could never get passed any other way, and a bunch of the country club Republicans are aching to pass, and God knows what other crap's in it. International courts, gun control, probably limiting the alcohol in my beers. God knows what's in it.
Kurt, here's the reason. If you don't let this president at this time pass this bill or have at least the authority to negotiate these sorts of bills, you will never, ever have a foreign trade bill again be negotiated. Now, some people might say that that's a good thing. Some people might say that we want all of every congressman and every senator to be able to offer their individuated input into these things. You can make that argument, but if you're going to make that argument, make that argument. Understand that this is almost as much about the process as it is about the outcome.
Well, I'm with Kurt. I think the process at this point is irretrievably broken either way. I mean, look.
They can still have an up or down vote, Leon, so they can say, we don't like the deal, fuck it, we're going to throw it out.
You have to understand the level of precedent that's been set. Hold on, Kurt. Hold on. Let me say something here real quick. The level of precedent that's been set with the way that this president has dealt with Congress and the bad faith that has been allowed to go forward in terms of the executive amnesty, in terms of all the other things that he's done unilaterally that he has not had the constitutional authority to do, that the Democrats have done nothing to stand up for. The old system that we used to operate under, I don't think is valid anymore going forward. And I don't think that that envisioning that we're going to go back into some fairyland where the Congress is ever going to trust the president again, now that all of this water has gone into the bridge, I don't think it's ever going to get there. I don't think we're ever going to get back to that point. And frankly, I don't know that we should after the last 8 years. So
see, to break in there, historically, this is how almost every trade deal has gone. That this really does. I'm a guy who doesn't support free trade. I don't like the TPP. I still believe in respecting the executive's power here in terms of negotiating this. I'm that rare breed of person who, even though I think it's going to be awful, says we veto the bill, veto the agreement, but we still give the president fast-track authority because this is the way it's always been done. If we try to limit him here, does that mean you need congressional authority to file a case with the World Trade Organization? And in that case, how are we going to fight against China and its rampant abuses in terms of trade? If you want to limit the president's authority to send his own negotiating team to try to negotiate these types of treaties because you think that limiting the authority is the best way to fight free trade and protect jobs in America, you could actually end up cutting our legs out from under us when it comes to challenging abusive trade practices that contribute so much to the trade deficit in the United States. So I'm all about, but as Senator Cotton pointed out in his letter on the Iran deal, a future president can use this trade deal hanging around the other politician's neck, and if Americans don't want free trade, if they don't want cheap, crappy, society eroding, terrible trade deals and outsourcing with Asian countries, well then, you know what? Let's split up the Democratic coalition between Warren and Hillary Clinton and elect a Republican who will actually fight for American jobs. If we erode the authority
to do this, negotiate these deals, we erode our authority at the WTO. And that could prove even more devastating because we wouldn't be able to call out China for its rampant abuses.
All right, so let's move on a little bit. We've probably talked at least 5 minutes more about the TPP than our audience probably cares about. Let's talk a little bit about the NSA. House voted 338 to 88, pretty overwhelming margin to end collection of phone data by the NSA. Is that a good deal for America, Amy?
Yes. How could this not be a good deal? I mean, and even I read a bit of the stories you sent, and what's funny is even the people who are opposed to this idea or want to retain this stuff have shown that the data they're retaining is not useful at all. It actually isn't producing value, and it costs a lot. So it's a useless government program, shockingly enough, because it had such broad aims with no remit, no focus, no target, and it's just, you know, really not necessary, and it's an invasion of our civil liberties. So to me, this seems like a no-brainer because it's not actually producing results, one, and then two, there's that kind of nitpicky thing of, you know, civil liberties. That it would be really nice if we went back to a world of, you know, believing in American values and not obsessively fearing that we must study every piece of content on American cell phones without a warrant.
So Neal, if you combine this with the fact that the Patriot Act is in at least potential trouble in terms of reauthorization, is this an argument that the Rand Paul wing of the GOP has, I guess, won? I mean, is this debate essentially over, that the kind of old national security first Republicans who were at least initially all in favor of the NSA, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, I mean, have they lost this debate even within their own caucus right now?
No, I don't think so. You know, are we talking about potentially undoing things like the Department of Homeland Security and all these other government programs? I don't think that's exactly how it works. Nor do I think that when it really comes down to it, they will vote to imperil our national security in that way, because that's exactly how it would be framed. You know, privacy concerns be damned, they're going to continue to do it, whether we know about it or not. I think that's the other thing that we need to realize here, is that if they want to do it to us, they can do it to us, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. So have they lost? No. They might go out of the public eye. I don't know. Jeff might be able to offer more of a perspective on this than I could, because I'm shit-faced.
Right. So Jeff, let's turn it over to you, and I want to ask, I know you have something to say about what the bill actually does, but you know, in light of the fact that this was a program that was, I guess, initially uncovered by, you know, Snowden, does this change at all the way that we think about him or what he did? The fact that this was passed by such a large margin?
No, it doesn't. I have a very dim view of Edward Snowden. And by the way, when we talk about someone like Snowden, he's a person who, my opinion, evolved on, although it was a quick evolution. Initially, I was like, well, you know, I'm never going to approve of somebody who goes and blows state secrets. But I thought initially he was a whistleblower. By the time he ended up in Moscow, I was like, no. This has been a foreign intelligence operation. You do not end up in Moscow by accident. Believe me, it's no accident, and anybody who claims otherwise is just naive without getting in all of the details. The bill that was just passed is poorly understood, very misunderstood by people. Everyone's saying, oh, this is going to end the sort of mass collection of metadata. It's not going to do that at all. It's going to change the culling and collection of metadata. And it is not going to, I believe, from my understanding of it, and from my talking to people who also understand it in various communities, it will not substantially affect the abilities of our IC to the intelligence community to glean the sorts of information that we need to glean from potential targets, whether they are terrorist, you know, foreign terrorist, Islamic terrorist targets, or whether they're domestic targets. And again, it's strange because I find myself dispositionally, naturally, I would incline towards that Rand Paul, hey, leave us alone kind of a side. But by experience, I have grown up in a different world, which is the one of understanding where the intelligence community comes from. And I do not think that what the NSA was doing is nearly as creepy as people in popular understanding think it to be. People think that, oh, you're listening to your phone calls. This is more like if you ever watched The Wire, where they would be like, okay, I want to know time, place, location of call placed, phone number to whom it was placed, that sort of a thing. That to me strikes me as far more reasonable, especially when you're talking about a pressing national interest like counterterrorism. So this is one of those points of departure that I have with the general libertarian point of view.
All right, Kurt, last question goes to you. The House has finally stopped shooting itself in the face and passed a 20-week abortion ban, a measure that's favored by over 60% of Americans. Depending upon the polls, up to 70% of Americans favor it in its particulars. This is, of course, I mean, look, if you look at people who support abortions at that late of a term, it is an extremist position. It is roughly the same percentage of people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job, who believe that interracial marriage should be illegal. I mean, these are extremist positions that are held by 30% or less of the American public. And yet, it is treated by the media and by Democrats who are fundraising off of this as a legitimate political position. The bill itself is obviously DOA. It's DOA in the Senate. Obama's going to veto it. But do you think that the Democrats having a cow over something that the vast majority of America agrees with will help turn the tide of the debate in the country?
Well, look, I think the position of supporting abortions after 20 weeks is despicable, inhuman, and perfectly in line with progressivism as it's manifested itself over the last 100 years, starting with Margaret Sanger. That being said, why the hell does the federal government think it has the authority to tell people when they can and can't have abortions after 20 weeks? I've looked at the Constitution. I don't see it in there. Don't say Commerce Clause. Don't say 14th Amendment. It's not state action. I believe in the Constitution, and the Congress simply doesn't have the power to do this. So we've made a good and important point. Oh, I love the policy. Policy is great. I wish every state would stand up and say, hey, don't murder your babies. But the federal government has no power or authority that I can see to justify doing it. So we've managed to kind of fog it up a little bit. It becomes a little opaque. So yeah, that's the problem with grandstanding. You come up principle against principle. So,
well, and I'd be more inclined.
I think it'll make some points for us, which I'm all for. But I think it's going to die, and it should.
I'd be more inclined to give a crap about the federalism principle that you're bringing up, if not for the fact that unelected federal officials, namely judges, have dictated to the states that they can't set their own abortion policy. So, to me, again, I totally understand the point that you're saying, but where the water is so far into that bridge to me that I think that it's a little bit late to put that particular toothpaste back in the tube. We're out of time, and we're going to close down.
We need to be stuffing it back into the tube, man. We need to look. The Constitution's got all the answers to all the questions. The Constitution.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that once we redo a Roe versus Wade in light of what the Constitution says, instead of what the Supreme Court invented it to.
There is one thing that has to be understood about this legislative fight, and I have given so much crap to congressional Republicans that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this. But the pro-lifers who patiently awaited this, groups like the National Right to Life Committee and SBA list, they have played this so well in bringing these Republicans and corralling them into finally supporting this vote. But the one thing that's not appreciated here is actually the inside scoop of how they were able to persuade Congress to actually get behind this. And I have it confirmed from multiple sources that the deciding factor in this entire bill and getting this vote this week was Matt Harvey's dazzling performance 2 days ago.
Someone mute Bill McMorris. We're out of time. We're going to close up. We're going to close up the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends at this point. I want to thank my panel for being with us. Neal Dewing of the Federalist, Jeff Blehar of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk, F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Amy Otto of the Federalist, for filling in for Scott Lincicome in his absence. Thanks
I apologize for not backing the TPA for him.
And thanks to Kurt Schlichter, our guest. We're delighted that you've joined us, and we hope that you'll be with us next week on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends.
Thank you guys for the opportunity to use the word sodomize in a large public discussion.
Well, you did great.
Kurt, I want you to know that I've won a couple of bets because I placed the over-under.
We're on live right now. We're live, everybody.
And Bill wants to say the last horrible thing before we go off.
Kurt, as the guest, it's your job to offend a social minority. Good Lord.
No longer the biggest cheaters in the NFL. Good.